This weekend, fortunes were reversed as Zambian opposition leader Hakainde Hichilema beat incumbent President Edgar Lungu to win by more than 1 million votes in a spectacular landslide victory. The incoming president has tried 5 times before now to become president and lost to Lungu in 2015 in a very close election. Hichilema inherits a country whose economic performance has stalled in recent years due to declining copper prices, significant fiscal deficits, and energy shortages. Zambia remains one of the least developed countries in Africa, with 58% of the population living on less than $1.90 a day and an average life expectancy of 62 years. But this was not the picture in 2011. Zambia is a developing country and achieved middle income status in 2011. Through the first decade of the 21st century, the economy was one of the fastest growing economies in Africa, and its capital, Lusaka, the fastest growing in the Southern Africa Development Community. Zambia itself is one of sub-Saharan Africa's most highly urbanized countries. About 1/2 of the country's 16 million people are concentrated in a few urban zones strung along the major transportation corridors, while rural areas are underpopulated. Unemployment and underemployment are serious problems. The national GDP has actually doubled since independence, but due in large part to high birth rates, per capita annual incomes are currently at about 2/3 of their levels at independence. The government has succeeded in reducing the cost of doing business, but other important indicators of the business environment, such as restrictions on trade and government and judicial integrity, have deteriorated. While battling the coronavirus and the subsequent fallout, Zambia became the first African country to default on its sovereign debt payment. The country still owes a substantial amount to China and other developmental partners. Into this picture steps the incoming president of Zambia. Today, we're looking at the economic task ahead of Zambia's new president. I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me is Chibamba Kanyama, economist and former communication officer at the International Monetary Fund. Chibamba, good morning, or rather, I think good afternoon your time now. It's a pleasure to have you once again on Business Edge.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tolo. Good afternoon.
All right, let's start by just a quick picture that takes us a bit backwards. The outgoing president's party, that's the Governing Patriotic Front, swept to power in 2011 on the promise of less taxes, more money in people's pockets, and more jobs. The party says it has remained true to its pro-poor policies. What do you think the economic legacy of President Edgar Lungu is? As we look at Zambia right now, he's leaving, someone else is coming in.
It's about income inequality. That's on one hand, income inequality in that we have seen higher levels of poverty across the country. We have experienced high debt levels, and that's really the legacy that we have, huge domestic and external debts. It's not good because most of the resources that the government is mobilizing go to pay debt. We know that there has been significant investment in infrastructure, airports, roads and bridges, but that's on account of high debt levels because all the money used to invest in these projects was borrowed money, largely from the Chinese. We also have Eurobond debt. We don't know where much of the money was applied to, and we owe about $3 billion just in Eurobonds. So this is kind of legacy that we have, and the legacy people say is corruption. And I'm sure that a number of things will begin to emerge in coming months on what really transpired, on financial accountability, and I'm sure the new government will leave that to the investigating agencies.
Yes, and it's true. Some of the projects have been called white elephant projects, like the new airport as well, questions arising from that. But for the first time since 1998, Zambia plunged into a recession in 2020. as the COVID-19 pandemic spread across the globe. Now, the president would like to say it's as a result of the pandemic, but many others have pointed to decisions leading up to the pandemic as well. So what actions and decisions do you think led Zambia to that situation that we see a new president now will have to try and fix?
We had high deficit levels, and that's the major problem. High, number one, the same debt situation. The government found itself with very little resources to spend in health. Because when you are talking about COVID, you must also be talking of how do you contain it. You must have sufficient internally generated resources for oxygen, whatever, to support health systems, to manage medicines. We didn't have that money. We entirely depended on the donors to curb and curtail the COVID surge. Why? Is because the economy was already weak. The budget itself was supported domestically. Historically, Zambia enjoyed support from the bilateral donors who would finance and support the budget. About 15 to 20% of the budget was financed with the support of donors. Now, we don't have that anymore because of accountability issues, lack of transparency, poor management systems. So the budget is financed totally from domestic resources, and part of the domestic resources supporting the budget coming from domestic borrowings, and it's making things worse.
All right, so we know that around the world when elections come, the economy happens to be, if it's not the first, but one of the top 2 or 3 issues that really drives people to the polls. And it wasn't any different for Zambians. The International Labor Organization estimates that unemployment rose to 12.17% in 2020. That's the highest since the outgoing president's party took power in 2011. For young people in Zambia, it's much worse, with an estimated 1 in 5 without a job. And a lot of people said they were going to vote for a job, for a future. The cost of living has also increased rapidly. What is the incoming president's stance on the economy? Is he for more taxes? Is he for taxing mining companies, which we'll come to in just a bit? Is he for more involvement for the private sector? Is he someone who espouses liberalization reforms for the economy? What does he think he needs to do? What are the incoming president's stance on issues around the economy? What does he stand for?
The first thing is stabilize investor confidence. That's the first thing. So investor confidence refers to managing some of the risks that facing the country. Much of risk is about potential default. The risk can be posed by high deficit levels. And we know for sure that most of the international rating agencies gave us very poor rating the past 18 months, which led to low investments to Zambia. So here is going to signal very strong support for private sector investment. That one he has actually already signaled, and he will say that during the inauguration speech. He has to demonstrate capacity to respect property rights, so that if there are any disputes, this must be settled through the legal system, through the courts, and not through a political approach, the way we saw with one of the mines in Zambia taken over by the state. And that alone threatened investors because they felt their investment, their assets were not secure. If government can just possess an asset like that, then it risks potential for further investment, especially the direct long-term investment. So he will focus on that. He will focus on ensuring that the private sector grows and expands by stabilizing the economic front, increasing levels of confidence for that, because these are the companies that employ people. He is also pro-SME. He has actually already signaled to the Revenue Authority that let us be moderate on how we treat the SMEs. Let them grow so that when they grow better, then you can collect higher taxes in the long term. So in other words, he's really created a level, an environment of trust and confidence, enabling people to know that I don't have to belong to a certain region of a country to have a business opportunity. Everyone, whether old or young, can now participate equally.
Okay, so the 59-year-old Hakainde Hichilema was a CEO of an accounting firm before he entered politics. We also saw a bit of reaction from the markets when the announcement was made on Monday. What do you think of his pedigree? Even though for many of us on the continent, we see good pedigree, but it doesn't end up being actualization when people enter into politics and into governance. But in terms of his pedigree, what do you think?
I have a lot of confidence in him. He's someone that I have related with for a long time, and he knows me, and I know him well. We communicate, and I know he's a man of integrity. That I can guarantee. He's a man of integrity. He's what he says he will do. That I can put my head on that, my neck on that. He will do what he has promised. I know he hates corruption. He is a person who is known internationally because he worked for as a consultant for Grant Thornton, through which he engaged with international investors already. So they know him, they know his profile. And by the way, he's an economist, and he's the right person at the moment where we have these high debt levels. He's the right person. He's able to negotiate. He is a great negotiator. And I don't envy the incoming Minister of Finance, because he will be facing a president who understands what the Minister of Finance should be doing. I expect that there'll be a lot of transparency in dealings, zero tolerance to corruption, that he has actually said it, fair business dealings that he would believe, and the rule of law, which is very critical. He will leave the investigating agencies to probe issues of corruption so that he doesn't entangle himself as head of state into those areas. Let him fix the economy. So he will focus on driving growth and ensuring that there's a fair share of Zambian participation in most of the economic activities, including business.
You sound very positive about this incoming administration. So let me ask you about an assessment of Zambia that was given. And the assessment of the situation was that the country lacked an adequate strategy for its investments and economic growth over the past decade. The roots of its debt crisis are as an investment crisis, where projects were insufficiently vetted and poorly prioritized. The assessment goes on to say if public investment were better managed and the new leadership could stamp out corruption, then the decade to come would be much better. Do you agree with this assessment? And given the words you've spoken about the incoming president, do you think this is something he's going to be able to manage to change?
He definitely will manage to change this. Number one, I fully agree with that assessment. What curtailed growth in Zambia is poor management, is lack of following the rule of law, is failure to give independence to public institutions to manage affairs. So there was a lot of patronage. Appointments were based on patronage. So you had incompetent people, incompetent in almost all areas. We had a cabinet that didn't understand the role of the International Monetary Fund. I remember I just returned from the IMF, and the Minister of Finance then, who is now part of the Hakainde Hichilema's team, he called me to help him talk to cabinet. No, that did not take place. He wanted me to talk to cabinet just to address them what IMF is about. Now, when you have a cabinet that does not understand the IMF and what it does, do you think that's a cabinet that can engineer growth and inspire confidence and trust? So Zambia suffered from a trust issue. Zambian people never trusted their own government. Investors never trusted their own government. So I tell you something, that just from the savings in terms of good policy management, accountability, just savings in terms of transparency in the management of financial affairs, that money from the domestic resources is enough to cater for what people are crying for: better health services, better education. That I know he will do. And really my optimism is not from without, because the things that he's doing are the things I have been trying to advise the previous government, but I was misunderstood and taken to be maybe being influenced by him. Actually, he never influenced me on anything. He will listen to what I was saying, but the previous regime never listened to what I'm saying.
Okay, Chibamba, let's pause here. When we come back, we need to get into Zambia's debt conversation. The pressure is going to be on the new president to restructure the economy. We also have to talk about mines. Zambia happens to be Africa's second biggest copper producer. Is it going to benefit under the new president? We'll continue this conversation on the other side of this break. This is Business Edge. My guest from Lusaka, Zambia today is Shibamba Kenyama. He's an economist, and we're looking at the economic task ahead of Zambia's new president. Now, the country's debt under President Lungu tripled to about $19 billion. The IMF has been mum about Zambia's pleas for debt relief, and observers expect that the lender is going to press for austerity measures after the polls, a condition for new loans. But many also expect that the pressure is going to be on the incoming president to restructure the economy. Hichilema said he is one who supports liberal and private sector-led reform. So Chibamba, what do you think the situation is that will play out between the IMF and the incoming president as regards restructuring the economy and getting new loans for Zambia?
We shouldn't have been here in terms of external debt and IMF discussions if the previous regime had provided the kind of political support for negotiations to take place. The negotiations started with Zambia 2015. At the time, I was still with the IMF, and I'm very, very aware there was very strong resistance by the president. His eyes were on 2016, that if I embarked on an IMF program, then he would be risking his chances of being elected in 2016. But then he was just acting, he had just taken over somebody who died. Now, there was no political will because he got that election and the past 5 years just been playing ground with the IMF. No serious discussions, there is no commitment until the things deteriorated to where we are now. It's towards the election that we began to see some sign of discussion this year. Actually this year when the IMF team came over and had some discussions and came again in May. But much of that was much more like technical support to Zambia to tell them which areas to reform, which areas to begin to look at, what kind of economic reforms Zambia needs to be aligned properly to what IMF is expecting. Now, first of all, you needed some technocrats who understood how to negotiate with the IMF. Number two, we also needed political will by the head of state and his cabinet to show support for a program. I talked to the potential Minister of Finance. I had a discussion with him 2 weeks ago. He said, look, for the new regime, it will take 3 months for an IMF program to be concluded. And the reason I believed him is because he was a Minister of Finance at the time Zambia had an IMF program. Apparently, nobody knew that we had 2 IMF programs between 2006 and 2011. We had, and he was the Minister of Finance at the time, and he successfully negotiated. He doesn't talk much, he's just a man of action, very intelligent economist. So I believe him that within 3 months, he will be able to engage IMF fruitfully and productively.
Okay.
That would do justice to us because to unlock a lot in terms of bilateral support as well as restructuring the existing debt.
So let's get to the mining conversation. So President Lungu's administration had pressed ahead with some controversial moves to nationalize strategic mines. An analyst has said this would damage the country's image and also deter new investments, which you have also alluded to in the previous conversation. So a dispute with multinational corporation Concola is raging after the government tried to take over its mines. The government is also locked in a bitter dispute with Glencore, one of the largest investors in Zambia's mining sector. What do you think the incoming president will do regarding these issues, and particular Zambia's mining sector, as it's such a large driver of revenue for the country?
Number one, he has already hinted on ensuring that the mining sector expands. Exploration expands, investment expands, and this has to do with realigning the tax policies. In terms of aligning tax policies, he hinted on the fact that the policy stability is important. You don't have to change policy, especially tax policy every often. So he will ensure that tax policy is sustainable and supportive of long-term investment. And two, he will definitely not want government to have any interest in the mining industry. He will not play a role. So he will give back those money to the private sector. They have to find equity partners, and KCM may be handed over to the original owners on certain conditions. There's a lot to come out of KCM anyway, because some issues of transparency and accountability has to come to the table. There's a lot that took place during this window, and you'll be hearing about that in coming weeks. In the meantime, the new government will just want to inspire confidence once again to the mining sector that we will support investment in mining. We shall remove double taxation where you have royalties and then they are non-tax deductible when it comes to other tax benefits. So he will ensure that he supports long-term investment. And you see FDI growth in the mining sector grow as we go along so that we can take advantage of higher copper prices. Now the copper prices are at their highest at the moment, but we are not leveraging that because production is constrained.
All right, so as we wrap up, we have to talk about that debt just a bit more. So Zambia's stock of public debt increased to an unsustainable 104% of the GDP in September 2020, and it's expected to rise slightly in 2021 before decreasing in the medium term because of improved coordination between fiscal and monetary policy, as well as the economic recovery plan or the program. What does the incoming administration need to do to attain debt sustainability for Zimbabwe? I know you've mentioned a few of the points, but just help me wrap it up together once again, given, of course, that Zambia was the first African country to default. We have that high unemployment level, and then we have an incoming president that seems to be somebody who international companies and investors and IMF and World Bank are going to like. So what do we think is going to happen with the debt?
Number one, he will restructure the debts. So he will get the IMF program on board, and then the creditors will agree to restructuring, of course, with some kind of penalty on that. And once he does that, then to provide the relief for the country to be able to increase production, channel those resources towards activity that will generate more income to pay off these debts. And we shall take advantage of the higher copper prices and the earnings from there to have a sinking fund so that we begin to redeem the debt slowly. And as a final thing for me, I believe that he will focus on getting bilateral support. You know, our budget for about 7 years, our national budget has not been supported by bilaterals. The England, UK government, Italian government, they just been going directly into those sectors without the money going through the government coffers. So this time, with transparency and accountability, he definitely will receive that support. So we'll have a budget to be supported by about 15 to 18% through donors. So that's what I'm expecting.
All right, Shibamba, we look forward to further conversations to see how Zambia works its way back into proper positive economic foothold and hopefully also beginning the incoming president to speak on these issues. Shibamba Kiyama, economist and former communication officer for the IMF, joining me from Lusaka, Zambia. Thank you so much for joining me today.
You're most welcome.
And it is an interesting conversation that we will, of course, be following. There were concerns about the transition, given that Zambia is one of the continent's most sure-footed democracies. There had been some concerns from Western partners over the past few weeks as to how the elections will play out. But we know how they played out. Six-time lucky incoming President Hakainde Hichilema is now going to be president of Zambia, but he has a huge economic task ahead of him. We'll be following developments in Zambia. All right, let's wrap things up. And of course, we do that. We're giving you a few stories we're keeping our eyes on. NC4 to watch is coming up next. So here are a few stories we're keeping our eyes on as we wrap things up. NC4 to watch starts in the northern part of the continent, where Libya's oil minister Mohamed Oun says the country will sustain its current crude oil output if lawmakers can overcome a lengthy dispute and pass the OPEC members' first nationwide budget in about 7 years. The North African country is producing roughly 1.3 million barrels per day, with a target of 1.5 million by the end of 2021. From the north to the east, Kenya's energy and petroleum regulator has maintained the pump prices of kerosene, petrol, and diesel constant in its latest review, the second time in a row since its last price ceiling was set in July of 2021. These prices will stay between August 15th and September 15th of this year. The price of imported petrol increased by 6.21% from $520.04 per cubic meter in June 2021 to $552.35 per cubic meter in July. Broadband network and digital services offered in Seychelles are getting a boost from a new cable system that will be leased by Seychelles-based telecommunications provider Intelvision with support from the IFC. The IFC support to Intelvision, which provides data, internet, and internet-based voice services as well as pay TV, includes an up to $10 million loan from its own account, an additional loan of $10 million mobilized from partners under the managed co-lending portfolio program. And finally, relations between Ghana and Iran seem to be on the right path. The Chamber of Commerce Director in Iran, Gholam Hossein Shafai, announced the expansion of economic ties with the West African country. He affirmed that he has held a meeting with the Ghana ambassador in Tehran, adding that in recent years, Ghana has developed its agriculture and Iran has a good position in the production of agricultural machinery. Some interesting bedfellows there for you as we wrap things up. This is it on this edition of Business Edge. As always, thank you so much for joining me. Head to YouTube, follow us on our social media accounts, and of course, download our mobile app on your Play Store and your App Store to take us with you wherever you go. I'll see you again 11 a.m. West African time on Wednesday. I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun.